Without further ado, here is Angela McArdle.
Thank you, guys. Ben is a really short person who's on stilts, so he has to make the microphone really tall for him. There we go. Now I had to make it, better suited for a regular sized person, which is what I am. Just kidding, I'm not going to use the stand. So everybody woke up this morning, and now you're here. When you wake up in the morning and you go about your day, you probably don't think about what it would be like to wake up across the country in some place like Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria. And that's okay, because there's only so many things you can keep in your head at once, right? And there's only so many tragedies you can concern yourself with. So I don't blame you or myself or anyone for not thinking about the plight of war-torn families all the time and first thing in the morning. But somewhere on the other side of the world, there are people who wake up every morning with some very mixed feelings about life.
It's good, but I can't see the screen.
They wake up with adrenal fatigue and a mix of this desperate will to survive with heartbreaking grief for the people that they've lost to American militarism. And it's pretty heartbreaking because they live in fear of us, like you and me. And they've never met us. They live in fear of the next drone strike, the next battle between rebel insurgencies and American troops. Somewhere on the other side of this world is a child searching through the rubble of their blown apart home, looking for something left over to eat, trying to piece back together their shattered life, trying to make sense of it all. And some of them, they have a desire to seek revenge for the loved ones that they've lost in all of this. There are children who will grow up singularly focused on taking revenge on the United States for killing their parents and their families, for ruining their childhood and their way of life. There are people who are driven and haunted by rage and grief because of the war on terror. And here at home, we see the other side of that coin, right? We see veterans who are haunted by their actions, what happened over there in the Middle East and what they took part in. We see veterans who are run through a system that promises them jobs and education, and a lot of people see it as the only way out of a life of homelessness. And then that system dumps them into the streets with emotional and psychological trauma and PTSD, and no real prospects for their future and blown apart psyches. War does create job security, but it creates job security for military contractors. It creates drama for election cycles and things for news pundits to scream at and terrorize you with. But it doesn't create a comfortable future for the people who fight in those wars or for the people who are caught in the crossfire. And until the war machine stops turning, until maybe we throw a wrench in its gears, this vicious cycle will continue. It will continue to grind people up and spit them out, all in the name of freedom or safety or security. Over 40 years ago, isn't that wild? Over 40 years ago, United States intelligence agencies armed Osama bin Laden and his rebels so that they could fight against the spread of communism in Afghanistan. Covert operations like this are always done for a good cause. Communism, bad, freedom, evil. We want to stop the spread of communism. We want to stop a dictator. We have to stop radical Islam. But no good ever comes from regime change or arming counter-revolutionaries. It never happens. And after being played by US intelligence, Osama bin Laden, understandably, expectedly, turned on the United States. After the US meddled in Iran, the country took an anti-Western turn. In all of these situations, war was propped up by a desire to control the rest of the world and by lies. In 2002, Dick Cheney said, "There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt he is amassing them to use against our friends, our allies, and against us." That never materialized. That is embarrassing. An investigation by the House Committee in 2004 identified 237 misleading statements about the threat posed by Iraq. All those statements were made by George Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice. Is an interesting pattern forming, right? War and misinformation. Statements were made in 125 separate appearances. It's wild. A Senate committee investigation in 2006 covered the same thing, but we've forgotten it. We've forgotten it so quickly. 20 years ago, we went to war in Afghanistan because of what happened today, 20 years ago. Even though the people who flew planes into the Twin Towers had ties to the Saudis. And then we invaded Iraq again. And then we got involved in Syria and Yemen. For 5 years, US presidents have enabled the Saudi government to starve and bomb the people of Yemen. Last year, during Trump's presidency, there were 2.4 million malnourished and starving children in Yemen. It's heartbreaking. How many Yemeni children have died due to the USA's sponsorship of Saudi Arabia's war on Yemen? How much made in the USA shrapnel do you think has been found next to bloody corpses of innocent families? It's really grisly. Over 100,000 Yemenis, mostly civilians, have been killed in this crisis, and millions more have been displaced. And I bet most of us here couldn't even describe why we're over there or why we have helped the Saudis be over there. It's so far removed from us. But is it? Every president in the past 20 years has supported a legacy of militarism. It's normalized bombing weddings, murdering children, committing assassinations, executions without trial. It's far away, but it's still in the news every day that we consume, and we've just become so desensitized to it. Every president is directly responsible for continuing the war on terror. Every president in the past 20 years. I hope one day we get a libertarian president who will stop doing this. I hope one day we get an administration that has the guts to end the war. But for now, what do we do about it now? For now, we need a citizenry that's willing to actually take this to the streets and demand an end to the war on terror. And we need to push back by refusing to vote for people who send our troops off to murder civilians. We need to vote against the warfare state. We need to vote for peace and spread the message of peace across the country, because politicians in office are not interested in peace. So it's up to the people who are interested in peace to bring that message home. War leads to authoritarianism, and it also leads to poverty, homelessness. Wartime conditions always lead to a loss of individual liberty. There's nothing humanitarian about it. There are no humanitarian wars. On September 30th, 2019, Mohammed Salim and his remaining relatives had to carry the bodies of their loved ones, dead men, women, and children, out of their family home. They were killed in a drone strike operation the night before a wedding, when airstrikes started falling on the house next door to them. Suicide bombers from that house then set off their own explosives in response, and 40 people, including 12 children, were killed in all the back and forth crossfire. Donald Trump was our commander-in-chief. I know he talked a lot about bringing the troops home. It didn't happen. It was done under his watch. Every drone strike murder is done under the president's watch. I don't like the term collateral damage. I think it's murder. In January of 2020, Trump authorized the assassination of Iranian General Soleimani in Iraq. We weren't at war with Iran. It's so insane. I'm really glad that Biden has pulled the troops out of Afghanistan, but we see what a disgusting mess it's left. It's not a good thing. Biden hasn't put forth any plan to roll back the surveillance state policies that go hand in hand with the never-ending war on terror. Each year, our administration renews the Patriot Act. They renew it indefinitely, and they support policies that allow and enable the government to spy on citizens in their homes. It's just another way that the war on terror is actually much closer to home than we think. The war on terror it props up state-sponsored spying of Americans, not just spying on people out of the country. And now we face a new war, right? The war on germs. American empire, it set its gaze upon the Middle East many years ago, and people cheered that our troops were sent off to conquer, this shadowy enemy on the other side of the world. But now militarism has turned its gaze inward. Our police forces have been militarized, war has been normalized, and it's been brought closer to home. We have militarized police battling protesters in our streets and enforcing lockdowns, measures like that to quote unquote keep us safe in the war on COVID. So I do wonder what the next war will be fought over and how many lives will be ruined. We've got the war on terror, the war on germs, the war on drugs. Really, it's a war for our minds and maybe our attention spans, because we're just saturated with conflict every day. It's so easy to tune it out because it just becomes so exhausting. But just remember, looking back, we knew there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And we knew how ridiculous the term WMD sounds now. Most of us have the wherewithal to be embarrassed for the people who fell for it. I hope that we have the wherewithal to look forward into our future so that we don't support another war, so that we're careful and skeptical of what we think of when we hear about a next threat to our national security. I hope that Americans have the same sense about the war on COVID that many of us have now when we look back and think about how absurd the threats of weapons of mass destruction were in Iraq. Because the war on COVID, just like the war on terror, is perpetuated by a steady stream of lies and government propaganda and a desire to control people. The government needs people to buy into their narrative to continue the never-ending wars. They need fervent nationalism and obedience to the narrative. That's why they say things like, tell us to do our part. Do your part. We're all in this together. I would challenge you that to do our part is to push back against the propaganda campaigns. It's to push the radical idea that peace is superior to war, that peace is safer than war, and that our personal liberties should never be given up in a time of war or crisis, that American military bases don't belong scattered across the globe, and that our troops should be brought home. Go out and tell people that our troops don't deserve to be ground up in the war machine, that Yemeni children shouldn't be punished in any sort of starvation campaign, that American drone strikes shouldn't crash weddings. This is our call as libertarians and liberty-loving people, right? As peaceful people, as people who love what this country once represented. We are called to be the bearers of truth as we walk through an empire of lies. So I ask you to commit that treason today and every day. Dare to spread the truth. Dare to stand up for peace and dare to call for an end to the war on terror. Thank you, guys.